Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week we're excited to welcome two special guests, Olivia Sanderfoot and Allison Shultz, to talk about Project Phoenix. This important project is exploring how wildfire smoke impacts birds on the West Coast and what that means for their survival in a rapidly warming world. Understanding these effects is crucial for shaping conservation strategies, and we can't wait to learn more from Olivia and Allison in this conversation. It's a truly fascinating discussion, and they were so great to talk to and are amazing advocates for the cause. I think you're going to walk away with a lot from this one. Okay, without further ado, let's grab our binoculars and let's get into it.
You're right. Things. Sorry.
No.
I mean, I've known Allison for a super long time. So Allison applied to come to graduate school at the University of Chicago in the Wayback World.
I know,
So-
which was that was like almost 20 years ago now or something like that. Is crazy. 15 years ago.
I choose not to think of that. I don't count up anymore. I can't. It's too many ups to count. I don't have enough fingers and toes anymore to keep counting up. But yeah. So then Allison went and got a master's degree with Kevin Burns, who we all know
Okay.
and love.
Yeah.
Your best man,
My
the manager,
yeah,
Kevin?
Nice. My best man, yes.
Oh.
And then on to get a PhD at Harvard with Scott Edwards. Who else was on your committee, Allison?
It was Scott and Hopi Hoekstra and John Wakely. There was a small committee. Those, but it was good. The hardest thing in the world was just scheduling all them. You know, the more famous all of your people are, the harder it is to get them all in the same room at the same time.
And that was before Zoom.
Yes, before Zoom.
Wow, yeah.
It would be much easier now.
Especially if one of them's John Bates, who has to fill in where to meet or who to meet, one of those meet me things.
I just have to remember to meet.
No, you have to sign up or we'll never get a meeting to meet.
I thought you were going to say because he's so famous, Shannon.
No,
That's what I
not
thought
a
you were
problem.
saying, too. Yeah.
That may be part of his issue, too. I'm not aware of the fame part, but his lack of attention to calendar details is notable.
It is.
Well, we're excited to have Allison and Olivia on. We've been wanting to do this for a while, and I'm glad it finally worked out. And we're wondering, just kind of to start things out, if you want to just give a little introduction to each of you and then talk about Project Phoenix a little bit.
Sure. Allison, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. I'll introduce myself, and then Olivia can introduce herself, and then she can introduce Project Phoenix, which really is Olivia's baby, and Olivia's, the truly the one in charge of this. I just get to go along for the ride, which is a lot of fun, too. But yeah, my name is Allison Shultz. I am Associate Curator at the Natural History Museum of LA County. In about 2 weeks, we'll have my 7-year anniversary of being curator here, and the time's just gone by so fast. It's incredible. I like to study kind of two main things. One is bird feathers and bird colors, and how and why are birds the colors that they are, and what else their feathers do, and how does changing one thing change another thing. And then the other is how are birds responding to the very rapidly changing environment that they currently live in. And so, I kind of started on that from an evolutionary perspective, and evolution across, years and decades instead of thousands of or millions of years. But it really spans the ecological evolutionary. And so Project Phoenix kind of fits in more in that bucket, but there are pieces of it that fit into the feather bucket too. And so we can talk about those a little bit later, but I will pass it on to Olivia.
Thanks, Allison. My name is Olivia Sanderfoot, and I am an ecologist. I dabble in all sorts of aspects of ecology, but all of my work is focused on improving our understanding of how wildfire smoke impacts birds, their health, their behavior, their evolution. I'm very curious to know if wildfire smoke disturbance shapes species distributions, shapes where birds occur on the landscape, and how they respond to fire and smoke in real time could impact species distributions and community assemblages and the way that we interact with birds during the summer and fall, and increasingly year-round as the fire season extends later and starts earlier. I just wrapped up a postdoc with Allison as one of my advisors at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. And I also worked very closely with Morgan Tingley at the University of California, Los Angeles. And I am now the leader of Project Feeder Watch at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So continuing my work in participatory science, which I really do think is the key to unlocking all sorts of mysteries about how birds are doing.
So, Olivia, how did you get so interested in smoke? What was the impetus for that? And then how did you take that interest and create what you created?
It's a long story. So, I completed my master's thesis at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with Dr. Tracy Holloway, who is an atmospheric scientist. So I was not in a bird lab for my first graduate research experience. I was in a lab full of amazing people who were studying air pollution and how air pollution changes over time and who is exposed to air pollution and how much air pollution they are exposed to and what the public health consequences of that exposure look like. And to fund my master's thesis, I was working in communications for the NASA Health and Air Quality Applied Sciences team, which is a group of interdisciplinary researchers who are focused on using satellite data to learn more about air pollution and public health impacts of air pollution. And while doing this work, I thought, gee, what do we know about how air pollution impacts birds? That seems very interesting. I just became a birder and I'd like to know. Well, it turns out we just didn't know that much. And so my thesis became a summary of what we know and don't know about how air pollution is impacting birds. I think that this knowledge gap is fascinating because we've known for a very long time that birds are inherently more sensitive to air pollution than other types of animals. This is due to the structure and function of their respiratory system. They utilize unidirectional airflow and cross-current gas exchange, and they have a very thin blood gas membrane. And this allows them to rapidly take in oxygen from their environment, but it also exposes them to all sorts of bad stuff that's in the air too. Their sensitivity to air pollution is why we used canaries to monitor air pollution in coal mines way back in the 1900s and all the way until like 1960. It's really crazy how long we were doing that for. And yet, despite the fact that we've known that birds are vulnerable to air pollution, we just don't know that much about how wild birds exposed to air pollution day in and day out respond to that stressor. How does it affect their health? How does it affect their reproduction? Does it ultimately impact species distributions and the diversity of birds on planet Earth? We really don't have good answers to those questions. So I outlined those key knowledge gaps in my thesis and applied for funding through an NSF graduate research fellowship to explore them further. And I was awarded that money, which I took to the University of Washington, where I worked with Dr. Beth Gardner. And learned all sorts of cool tools in quantitative ecology that I thought would be useful in answering these questions. While I was in Seattle, I experienced my first wildfire smoke event. Growing up in Wisconsin, I had never really thought much about wildfires. They felt like a faraway thing that certainly wouldn't ever impact my community, and I'd never seen wildfire smoke before. And it was a very surreal thing to look outside my window and see these really dark gray skies, to not be able to see clearly across the street. The air smelled like campfire, and it was very unnerving. We were encouraged to stay inside. It seemed like the birds were quieter, but I wasn't sure if it was just in my imagination. It all just felt very odd, and it sparked my curiosity specifically in wildfire smoke impacts on birds. And I thought that was a particularly useful question to answer now because we are seeing more fire on the landscape. We are seeing fires occur more frequently and burn more ferociously and produce more smoke, which means that both people and wildlife are increasingly exposed to wildfire smoke. And yet we know very little about what the repercussions of that could be and what some of the interventions might look like to reduce any harm associated with those disturbances. So my PhD was dedicated to learning more about how wildfire smoke impacts birds. And then I took some of those emerging research questions into my postdoc with Allison and Morgan. And now I'm hoping to inspire more people to use participatory science to answer some of these questions. The reason why participatory science would be so powerful in this context is because it's very difficult to forecast fire and smoke. We don't know where fires are going to burn. We don't know where the smoke is going to blow. So it's really, really hard to design field studies to intentionally capture smoke impacts. And I know scientists who have actually tried to do this and then been foiled by the fact that their study site didn't experience any smoke. They put in all this time and all this effort into monitoring, and then they never actually saw the disturbance that they were looking for. So participatory science allows us to engage tens of thousands of people in a very big area in monitoring birds, and they're all well positioned to be where smoke occurs when it happens. And we can pull their data together to retrospectively apply something like a before-after control impact study to learn more about how wildfire smoke is impacting our observations of birds and shaping bird behavior. So that is the motivation behind Project Phoenix. I told you it was a long story.
This is pollution.
What counts as pollution? That
Yeah.
is a good question. So certainly there are all sorts of places where air pollution comes from. So I like to think about air pollution as falling into two categories: anthropogenic and biogenic. So there's air pollution that's driven by people and our activities, and then there's air pollution that's driven by things that just happen naturally. So some examples of natural sources of air pollution do include wildfire smoke, windblown dust, sea salt spray. There are all sorts of reasons why we might see an increase in particulates in the troposphere. But then there are also things that we do that increase air pollution, like drive our cars and run factories. Anytime we're burning fossil fuels, we're contributing to air pollution. Then there are also two categories of impacts from air pollution. We can think about greenhouse gases, and then we can think about health-damaging air pollutants. So a lot of times when we hear about air pollution, we're thinking more about greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. And these are important gases because they shape our climate. That's the driving force of climate change and why we're seeing weather patterns change and why we're seeing an increase in the frequency and severity of fires. But those gases aren't causing immediate health impacts upon inhalation. The health effects come from the changes in climate. I am focused on the health damaging air pollutants. So what are the pollutants in the air that cause us to have an adverse health impact immediately when we breathe in? And so those are pollutants that actually interact with our respiratory system and cause damage right away. So fine particulate matter, suspended particles in the air, ozone. These are really common pollutants, especially in urban areas, that can cause harm to people. And we know that they cause harm to birds too. We just don't quite know how or to what extent.
I have a feeling that that is not something most people even think about. Right? They think about human health to fire if you've ever been in them. I grew up in British Columbia, and there are a lot of fires that have shaped a lot of my childhood and even recent past there. In 2018, wildfires were so bad. We visited the small town I grew up in, John and I and our whole family did. The pictures back then are totally gray. We were there for, I don't know, probably a week to 2 weeks. And the sky, we never saw a single bit of the actual sky. And indeed, it does smell like you're at a campfire.
It does.
And by the time we got home, every single thing we had smells like a campfire, including the suitcase for months afterward. But you kind of get used to it, right? So
You do. And
Yes.
especially living in cities too, like we're talking about wildfire smoke, but of course, here in LA, certain times of year especially, you can always see that continual haze that is constantly there. Yeah, it's very pervasive and something you don't think about. We talk about put on a mask, when you go outside, if you're going to don't do exercise. But of course, birds and other living things, they can't do that, right? They have to survive, and they can't go inside and be, with a HEPA filter and something like that.
Yeah, and here we're also touching on the legacy of air pollution in different places, right? So it is important to remember that fire is a natural and critical natural disturbance at that in many ecosystems around the world, including here in the United States. So smoke is not an altogether new thing, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a health effect for people and animals that have been exposed to smoke or that we've somehow learned how to deal with it. The particulates are toxic, and that's just true. And so I think we want to be careful to say that the reason why this is such an interesting area to focus on now is because the amount of smoke and the duration of smoke and the timing of smoke is different. So even if birds had figured out a way to respond to smoke in places where fire is a common occurrence, like British Columbia, at the times of year when fire is typically occurring, late summer and early fall, that doesn't mean that they're prepared to deal with smoke in places like New York City and Boston in spring, which is where we saw catastrophic impacts of smoke pollution in 2023. So there are smoke events that are very different than what birds have been exposed to historically. And as Allison said, it's really unclear what birds or other animals could do to protect themselves from smoke. And Allison and I have had a lot of really interesting conversations hypothesizing what birds might be able to do to protect themselves from smoke. And we're hoping that through projects like Project Phoenix, we're able to actually identify the mechanisms by which birds might be able to limit their own exposure. And Allison is leading some incredibly cool research leveraging museum specimens to help us better understand how species exposure might vary in different places and at different times of year. So I don't know if Allison wants to dive into that, but she's doing some really cool stuff with feathers.
Well, and Olivia, you say me, but really it's both of us. Olivia is
It's
also
a team project.
instrumental in this project.
We're a
But
good
yeah,
team.
I'm sure on the Birds of a Feather podcast, you love to talk about museum specimens and their importance and how museum specimens are time machines to the past. And
No,
of
we've
course,
never talked about that.
you've never, yeah. Well, and Shane Dubé's work in the Field Museum really got us thinking about what particulates feathers are holding, and Carl Foldner, of course, too. But how specimens are records of not only what the species themselves, but the environment that they lived in. And so we have kind of taken that work that was pioneered with you all in the Field Museum and are starting to extend it further by not only comparing patterns in Southern California, but also working with our mineralogy curator, Aaron Celestian, to develop methods to actually identify where that carbon's coming from. So we're working on some source apportionment analysis where we can say, okay, so we know this specimen's really dirty. Is it dirty because it was exposed to coal burning or automobile exhaust or diesel fumes or wildfire smoke? And so it's really exciting when you start to get to that level of detail, and we can start applying that to museum specimens to understand where and when smoke is from. And it really just opens the doors of the types of questions we can ask too. We have, I don't know if you remember the big smoke event on the East Coast in 2023 we was alluding to earlier, but when that happened, Olivia and Morgan kind of contacted a bunch of their contacts that are bird banders on the East Coast and had them sample feathers from across that area where we can identify, what types of smoke were these birds exposed to, how long ago was it, and sample feathers when they were banding birds and send them all to us. So I have in my cabinet in my office right over there, hundreds of packets of feathers from that smoke event. And then you might remember on the news earlier this year here in Los Angeles, we had our own set of devastating wildfires where we, of course, it's very interesting now to be a person who's studying fire. Olivia has dealt with this longer than I have, but you're like happy that you can collect data, but also not happy because, of course, wildfire, and especially in an urban area like it was in Los Angeles, is devastating to people's lives. So, but we were, okay, we'll take advantage of the situation however we can, and activated some of our bird banding colleagues here to set up a few sites around LA and kind of consistently over a 6-week period sample birds to see, what do they have in their feathers? Are they able to clean themselves? That's like a question, are birds able to get out of the smoke? And once we can start analyzing those feathers, we'll be able to understand, do different species with different life histories have different types of smoke exposure? Or is it really each individual does something differently? Are species able to mitigate exposure and clean themselves? Does the amount of carbon on feathers actually decrease over time? I'll say, just from turns out it's really hard to get carbon and small particulates off of feathers.
Yeah, I was wondering how you did that.
It's
what
hard.
you were doing.
Yeah, we use a sonicator and some really fancy salts and a bunch. We use Dawn soap and are able to get this, to get the carbon off the feathers, but also it often takes, a couple of washes and carbon keeps coming off. So if we can't get the carbon off with these chemicals and sonicators and things like that, a bird, just splashing around in a bird bath, I suspect is not able to clean itself very effectively. So yeah, we're that's kind of one project. And then we're also asking where people have thought a lot from a respiratory aspect, but from I of course think about feathers and I think about color, and I wonder if you've got a bunch of junk in your feathers and carbon that we know absorbs heat, absorbs the wavelengths of light that are responsible for keeping you warm, what does that do from a thermoregulatory perspective? And so had a post baccalaureate working with me last year, Melissa Gonzalez, who actually measured a bunch of really dirty and really clean birds with our infrared spectrophotometer. We're still working on those results, but short answer is it does have an impact. If you're a white bird and you have a bunch of carbon, you are absorbing a lot more heat into your feathers. Yeah,
that's what I need to do. I hate cold. Just going to cover myself in carbon and see if I can warm myself up.
There you go.
So,
Allison, I wanted RJ to... and Amanda, so what we're the Shane Dubé, Carl Foldner project that Allison was talking about was this thing that they came up with as graduate students at the University of Chicago, and they went into the collection, and we always said that we knew there were these series that look much grayer than other series for species like that had white bellies, for instance, so chipping sparrows and savanna sparrows. And it turns out that when they actually did an analysis of which birds were grayer or blacker versus lighter, it tracks the history of black carbon production in the Midwest. So they were looking specifically at Midwestern specimens. And it was a really dramatic thing. So for instance, you can see very clearly that birds get cleaner after the Clean Air Act was passed.
Wow.
And so, this is definitely something that is worthy of research, and at the same time, hard to figure out the best avenues to look at stuff. Olivia, I wanted to have you say something about citizen science and how you're gathering data.
Yeah. So we've got all these great projects going on at the museum to leverage bird samples and bird specimens through time. But we're also engaging volunteers across the American West in helping us to monitor birds during the fire season. As I'm sure many listeners know, we do a pretty good job in the U.S. of monitoring birds during the springtime, during the breeding season. We have the Breeding Bird Survey. Lots of folks are excited to go out and participate in eBird, especially during spring migration. And in the wintertime, we have several monitoring programs that are quite popular too. We do the Christmas bird count. We have Project Feeder Watch. But there aren't a lot of monitoring programs that are designed to engage folks in monitoring birds during late summer and early fall, sometimes considered the doldrums for birding in the West, especially in places like Seattle and LA. And so we want to motivate folks to monitor birds during that time of year because that's when fire and smoke events are most common. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that's not always going to be the case. We are forecasting that, especially in places like California, the fire season might end up being more like year-round. But right now, the peak fire season is really late summer and early fall, and there needs to be more intentional collection of data at that time so that we can track where birds are and where they are not when smoke disturbance is impacting local habitats. So we started Project Phoenix as part of this effort to do a better job monitoring birds during the fire season. And we began in 2023 with a pilot study just in California. And then in 2024, we expanded to include the states of Oregon and Washington. And this year is our third year. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to share that we have about 2,000 volunteers signed up birding in those three states. Yes, I know. It is a wow. And they're collectively monitoring about 1,600 different locations on a weekly basis. And they've committed to doing so between July and November. So every week between July and November, these folks are going out and conducting a 10-minute point count at a location of their choosing. And we've asked folks to pick places that are easily accessible to them and ideally personally meaningful, a place where they can connect with their local birds and feel more connected to their environment and learn the birds of their neighborhood. And we're going to pool all of these observations together and use their collective contributions to better understand how day-to-day changes in smoke pollution across the fire season influences where birds occur and which places they are drawn to in the urban-suburban matrix. So, for example, one question that comes up a lot is, are birds seeking out bird feeders or bird baths more often when it is smoky? And that is a really great question. And it makes a lot of sense that birds might do that. So we know that they're getting dirty. They might be seeking out bird baths to try to rid themselves of the debris that's accumulated in their feathers. But as Allison mentioned, we think this is actually incredibly difficult for them to do. They might also be thirsty. When I have been in smoky weather, I've found that I'm quite thirsty. You just really want to drink tons of water when you're exposed to those particulates. They might feel the same way. They're also contending with some pretty serious health impacts, right? Like they might be migrating through smoke. That's got to be taxing. They are likely mounting an immune response to smoke. They're likely experiencing respiratory distress. And that is going to cause them to burn through a lot of calories. Just like we lose weight when we're sick, we expect that that's also happening to birds. And in fact, I recently worked with Morgan and a phenomenal undergraduate student named Anna Nihei on a study that came out last year in Ornithological Applications, looking at how the body condition of birds at banding stations changes with frequent or sustained exposure to smoke. And we found that birds that are exposed to more smoke in subsequent captures, they have lost weight. They do lose a percentage of their body weight. They're in lesser condition. So with that in mind, birds might be seeking feeders. And if that were true, and this would be useful to them during smoke disturbance, putting out feeders would be a very easy thing for us to do in cities if this would be something that would be of use to them. Obviously, I don't want to make any recommendations right now because these are still hypotheses that we're exploring. And there are also other considerations to make when recommending whether or not to put out feeders, such as thinking about housefinch eye disease and avian flu and things like that. But I do think that the concept of birds seeking out bird baths and feeders, things that we could provide to birds, also opens up possibilities in thinking about how we could transform habitat into refuges for birds that are experiencing fire and smoke disturbance and really add value to our gardens and balconies and green spaces, and even just rethinking city streets and city designs. What do birds need from us when they're experiencing these stressors? What kinds of resources are they seeking? Could we provide those? And is this an opportunity for members of the public who are clearly very concerned when it is smoky? Allison and I are inundated with questions from concerned members of the public when it is smoky about how the birds are doing. This is something maybe we could all do to help.
Do you think, this is going to sound bizarre, do you think that some birds at least alter their breeding season such that their young would be more fully fledged by the time the fire season really starts, given that the vulnerable babies are so much more vulnerable? Nesting females can't really go anywhere, So if you really alter these fire landscapes, the birds are going to be like, well, now when am I supposed to breed? When's the best time? What am I going to do?
That is not at all a bizarre question. That is a phenomenal question, and one that we are actually seeking to answer. So there is a recent perspective piece led by Luke Kelly out of Australia, looking at trait fire mismatch, which Morgan and I are co-authors on. This explores how life history traits, phenological traits of birds and other animals may or may not be aligned so that they are optimal as fire regimes shift. And one example that we give is if birds are experiencing smoke pollution earlier in the year as the fire season kicks off earlier and earlier, that means that their young may be exposed to more smoke. And so possibly there would be an evolutionary advantage over time to trying to breed even earlier to get ahead of these smoke impacts. I also have been working with a postdoc researcher at the Toronto Zoo, Dr. Haley Spina, and Morgan, to use data from NestWatch, which is another participatory science monitoring program run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, to actually test some hypotheses related to how smoke influences the timing of avian reproduction and ultimately reproductive success. And that paper is under review. So I won't share any of the results right now, but they are very interesting, and I will certainly share the paper with you all if and when it is published.
Will Cornell have a fire a Project Phoenix extension, trying to move it a bit east?
Well, that project belongs at the Natural History Museum. It's very much a project that came from conversations with members of the LA community, with folks in communities along the West Coast, that's its home base. But I'm very excited to continue to lead the project and advise on the project and have a better understanding of the tools that are being worked on and developed at Cornell Labo to bring those to our community scientists. I also think that there's great potential in using other participatory science programs like Feeder Watch to better understand smoke and fire disturbance impacts on birds. We don't think about fires as being a wintertime thing. For folks who are unfamiliar, Feeder Watch is a wintertime monitoring program. So Project Phoenix engages volunteers on a weekly basis from July through November. Project Feeder Watch engages folks on a weekly basis from November through April. And we have not thought about using this data set to think about fire and smoke impacts because typically we don't see fires during the winter, but that's just not true in the US anymore. In fact, I think Colorado's largest fire on record occurred in December. Two of the largest fires on record in California occurred in December. We see pretty significant fire impacts in November these days in California. So there is actually the opportunity to use some of these other programs that have not historically been thought of as opportunities to inform fire ecology to build our understanding of smoke impacts. So that's the kind of work that I hope to be doing at Cornell.
So, I mean, after hearing you talk for what have we been doing this for not even quite an hour, I know why they hired you to have that job for sure.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. For those people who are listening, Olivia is taking over from another University of Chicago graduate, Emma Gregg, who passed away from an extremely aggressive form of cancer in the last year. And so I'm glad that that project and those people are in good hands.
Thank you. Yes, I have very big shoes to fill.
Yeah, she was one of the nicest people most of us have ever met.
Yeah, I've heard that over and over and over. I wish I got to know her better, and I feel very honored to be taking her place at the lab. Yeah, very big shoes to fill. I will have her office, and I've been thinking about how to honor that space with her memory.
Yeah, be kind. That's what I would say.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, Olivia is one of the kindest people that I know, so I think that she's a good fit for this job.
Thank you.
But for many other reasons too.
I do think if we want to know broadly, we need to figure out how to have specific monitoring dedicated to looking for the effects of fire. Because, I mean, we were just in British Columbia last week, and I can tell you I was struck by just how few birds there were.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody's going to voluntarily go bird watching in Vancouver, British Columbia at this time of year because there's nothing there. I know I've used to live there. I lived there for a super long time, but I was not prepared for just how kind of quiet it actually was. And so there will have to be specific efforts that are made to have those data be available for people like you to study.
Yeah. Do you think when you were in Vancouver that your sense of loss there is about seasonality, or do you think that there was a noticeable difference even comparing to other times that you've been in Vancouver at this time of year? Because there is a bit of a doldrums in that area, but I also have heard from a lot of people that this year feels slow.
It seemed to me way outside the distribution of how many birds you should be hearing or seeing. And we've been to Trail, British Columbia, for decades. That's where I was born. That's where I grew up. And so we've been there at this time of the year for years. I know that's a lot less urban. Okay, granted, John's about to tell me that, but still, it was completely dead. And I lived in Victoria, British Columbia as an undergraduate. I don't remember this, but I could just be wistfully looking back on living there, wishing I still did. But
I always say one of the best things about putting data into eBird is going back and thinking you've seen something different trend-wise and finding out it's exactly the same as it was 10 years ago.
I feel like that's encouraging, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that has more to do with the human memory and how it works, right? So we have people every year tell us, migration is slower this year than it was. And then John's like, oh, no, the data don't support that. So we're used to these questions. And so maybe I'm just falling into a human trap of remember there being more birds. But it was just really pretty quiet.
I'm sure Allison, yeah, go ahead, Allison.
I was just going to say, I think that speaks to the message that we really need to get across to people to do checklists, record birds, even if you think it's not very exciting and even if you don't see anything, like those are important data too. I was just talking with one of our Project Phoenix participants just the other day, and they're like, you don't want my data. All I have is mourning doves coming to my bird bath all the time. And I was, she's like, there's never anything very interesting. And I was like, no, actually.
How many mourning doves?
I was like, yeah, that's what we want. What we want to know is what's usually there. And that way, when smoke does occur and there's a change, then we can record that. I think something that we've kind of grappled with or talked about is the importance of beginning birders for this project and for other projects, because people who are advanced birders, they might be better at identifying birds, but they might actually ignore the common things. And, whether it's intentionally or not, maybe you just kind of tune the house sparrows out because they're there all the time. But a beginning birder is going to pay a lot of attention to the common things. And so, I think that it just goes to speak that everybody's contributions are valuable, no matter what you see and no matter how, what you're going out for, you're an important person, an important player in this project and in other projects too.
I always tell kids that they, especially urban kids, there's no birds in my neighborhood. And I always tell them, I promise you that you will see 5 species of birds on your walk to school. And they're like, no, I won't. And I say, yes, you will. I'm going to shut off everything. And if there's windows will let me, I'm going to open the windows of this classroom. I'm going to tell you to listen and tell me what you hear. And now there are technologies, obviously, that can help them identify things, which kids are completely fascinated by. The use of artificial intelligence in that way is not at all something the average person thinks about. But RJ and Amanda are new birders, relatively speaking. How important were these citizen science projects, these participatory science projects to you? I mean, how much do you use eBird?
I was going to say, Allison, what you were saying was super meaningful to me because RJ and I just went on a walk the other day and I was kind of annoyed because he had his phone out and was doing eBird and I was like, it's so boring right now. There's nothing here. Can we just take a walk? And I'm glad I heard you because now I should defer to RJ and his little list because I think we saw one bird and I was like, oh, come on. So, but Shannon, to your point, we were obsessed with Merlin and eBird. I love using Merlin. That's one of my favorite things about birding. What about you, RJ?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do think even though we're beginner, we do kind of overlook things sometimes, like you were saying, Amanda, and it's important to realize that we probably shouldn't be doing that because we definitely will go out and have our days where we're looking for, things that we're really excited about and days that we go out and don't see as much. And when we don't see as much, don't end up logging in as much. And, it's good to know that data is very useful because I think definitely it's a good idea for us to try to log all that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I just, doing it at the same place in a systematic way is a small thing. But I love the fact that, your survey length is 10 minutes and people question that. And it's no, we can show based on large data sets that this is an effective way to record those data in a way that can be used scientifically. So those are great things.
Yeah, it's just 10 minutes. It's very easy to get people to do 10 minutes, which is why we picked 10 minutes. And in a different study I led with a very similar study protocol looking at the impacts of changes in human activity during the COVID-19 pandemic on bird activity in the Pacific Northwest, we found that 10 minutes was perfectly reasonable. It was an effective engagement strategy to keep it short, but we learned a lot of interesting things just in 10 minutes.
I want to commend you for your website and for a bunch of reasons, but one thing is that you actually cite scientific literature associated with the things that you say about the health benefits of being outside and watching birds. I have my audiologist is really interested in how I hear because I don't hear from one side of my head anymore. And so we were talking about that, and I introduced her to Merlin, and then she said, well, I want to tell the people who come into my practice how important it is to be outside. And because even hearing impaired people, these apps can tell you what's in the environment. And so I shared your website with her, but I shared the papers that you had on your website so that she could talk with kind of a more scientific basis, not just that, yeah, we know being outside helps you better, helps with mental health, et cetera. But those papers, then I could forward them all to her. And so now she's got all of that in her mind when she talks to people about what you can do.
That's great. I had fun building the website, and we really spent a lot of time thinking about the design and the resources that we would share. We wanted it to be a place where people could easily find information about how to identify species, how to use eBird and Merlin Bird ID, and learn more about the value of birding. One of the papers that's cited on our website, and I cannot remember the authors, talks about how being in a place with more birds makes us happier, even if we're not birders. And I love that idea because it suggests that, you don't have to be a birder to benefit from the existence of birds around us. And so you don't have to know their names or know their calls. They're still going to make you happy. That's such a powerful thing. And I also feel like it's a gateway to getting people to learn their names, to say, if you're in a place with more birds, it makes you happy. Don't you want to know who's calling? So I cite that literature.
I also really like the design of your website, just like from a graphics perspective. I know this is like not exactly what we're talking about, but I did, like when I was perusing your website, whoever did that did a really fantastic job. Just like it's visually very captivating. And I think that is important too when people are looking at you. So I just wanted to commend you on that as well.
Thank you. Yes, we built it in-house, but we did benefit from Squarespace. So if anyone's looking to build a website, Squarespace does make it easy. There's no original code in there, but we did think very, very critically about the design to make it feel welcoming and engaging.
Yeah, we thought a lot about our logo too and went back and forth. Which species do we choose? We chose the Western tanager because it looked like it was the colors of fire, and it's also a very cool bird. But yeah, it was fun to think about that.
So if people want to get involved, then what's the best way to help out?
With Project Phoenix, it's easy. So if you go to projectphoenix.study, and the hardest part is spelling Phoenix correctly. I swear I spell that incorrectly all the time. Project Phoenix, projectphoenix.study, you can sign up to be a volunteer. All you need to do is send us your email address, and our amazing team will get in touch with you within 48 hours with instructions. You'll receive an email from our incredible communications lead, Yuka Wu, who's currently onboarding volunteers. The instructions are very straightforward. You pick a monitoring site. Again, this should be a place that is convenient and personally meaningful to you. So I conduct my surveys on my balcony because that's my home. That's where I have access to nature in West LA. Then each week you conduct a 10-minute point count, and you record all of the birds that you see or hear during those 10 minutes. And you record those bird observations as a single eBird checklist and upload that to eBird. And before you press submit, you'll just add the hashtag Project Phoenix to the comments. That way we know it's associated with our project. And you're done. It's very straightforward. We also provide resources on our website on species ID and how to get started with eBird, as well as a short instructional video for folks who have never used these platforms before. And our team is available Monday through Friday from 9 to 5 to answer questions. So truly, we try to get back to folks very quickly. My inbox is sometimes a little crazy, so Yuka keeps me on track. But she's very good at responding to emails, and she's a fabulous birder. And so our team is available to help with species ID and help folks out with the technology. That's actually probably the hardest thing about engaging new volunteers is helping them learn how to use eBird, how to use Merlin. These tools are really intuitive to folks who are already in the bird world, but if you're brand new to birding, it can feel very overwhelming. So we work really hard to make these tools easy to use. Merlin is pretty self-explanatory, but eBird is actually a little tricky. So it helps to have some videos to walk folks through the process.
So how are you funding this? Clearly you have staff associated with things. Staff is a tricky one. People are expensive.
People are
and
expensive.
Yeah, well, and that's why there's so much unpaid labor and all of these things. So
Mhm.
you must have, someone must be supporting you, and that's a good thing. We want to acknowledge however that funding came in.
Yes. So I am funded to do this work through the Lacretz Center for California Conservation Science. I won a 2-year fellowship through that program to support my research at UCLA and at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. That funded largely the development of Project Phoenix in the first 2 years of the program. In addition, Morgan has set aside some of his own funds in his lab to support our staff. The staffing for Project Phoenix is actually fairly limited. Yuka is incredibly efficient with the 10 hours a week that she works part-time, which is why there is sometimes a delay with email. We don't have a full-time team dedicated to responding to emails, so we do the best we can with the bandwidth that we have. And then my fellowship did come with some small amount of funds to support things like events and the stickers that we send out to our amazing volunteers. But we are actively applying for funds to continue this program. And Allison might have more to say about how our other work is funded.
Yeah. Well, and I just, just to throw something, the Natural History Museum did pick up Olivia as a
Yes.
postdoc when her fellowship ended,
Yes.
and she ended up not needing that very long because she got her amazing new job. But and is helping kick in some funds to keep Yuka going through
Sure.
the fall as well.
Yes.
Does that mean you're going to get to look for a new postdoc?
Well, funding is tight, so
Yeah.
yeah. But
We have a
yeah.
whole bunch of people we would suggest.
Yeah. Well,
And
we
actually,
do
we're
have,
losing them to Europe now.
I
Right?
know. We've got a grant in that scored very highly in the last NSF round. That who knows what's going to happen with NSF, but we're cautiously optimistic that maybe it will get funded this time. And yeah, we do actually at the museum also have a community science office
Yeah.
with several full-time staff and several part-time staff that are funded through the museum itself, and supplemented with grants and things that we get. We actually just hired our first community science curator, which was Christine Wilkerson, who starts in October, which is very exciting. So we'll have even more capacity to help with this type of project and with the many other community science projects that we have at the museum. We've got a pretty strong community and culture of getting everybody involved in doing science and in observing nature around them. And so Project Phoenix built off a lot of that kind of internal knowledge that our team has gathered through the many other types of projects that we do. We've got, like a project on looking for herbs. We've got a snail search. We've got our squirrel survey. We have backyard bet counts. We've got bat roost counts. And it's been great to have that knowledge to build on. So very excited to see what Christine coming on board as community science curator helps us with that even more in the future.
Why do I
But
know her name? What does she do? Why do I know her name?
She has been working at the Calicad, is a postdoc with Chris Shell right now doing like human coyote, human carnivore interactions. But yeah, she's excellent. So I'm very excited. But we already have an amazing team at the museum who does a lot of this. So
Yeah.
So
I do
just-
want to echo that sentiment, Allison. The folks at the museum have been instrumental in helping us achieve our community engagement goals. So I think it is not always the case, but often the case that as researchers, when we invite members of the public to participate in data collection, we're thinking just about our research. We're thinking just about the questions that we want to answer and the hypotheses we want to test. And including other people in data collection can help us do that. That was not the vibe that we went into Project Phoenix with. We went in thinking we have these research questions and we think participatory science is the best avenue to answer those questions. But we also want this to be an experience that is really transformative, that helps folks feel more connected to their neighborhood birds, that inspires folks to take up birding who haven't been birding before, that helps us think more critically about our relationship to the land and the history of fire on the landscape, how smoke is changing, air pollution, and yet even though those are hard things, leave feeling inspired to do more. That's a very hard thing to do because, as Allison said, that fire is traumatic, and that is really quite true for people on the West Coast. I mean, my family had to evacuate during the LA fires. We were very, very close. And when I came home, my balcony was completely covered in ash, and all of my plants were dead. Like, it was a very, very traumatic thing to leave town with a baby in the middle of the night because there are helicopters going overhead and you need to leave because the fire's down the block. Like, that's the kind of fire that the people who volunteer their time for Project Phoenix have experienced firsthand. So we need to be very careful when we talk about fire and smoke disturbance, that we're walking this line between recognizing that it is a realized lived experience for people that is also impacting birds. And we want folks to leave feeling like there's still more that we can do for us and for birds. So it's a very different approach to participatory science than just thinking about the research. And the community science office at the museum was essential in helping us get that messaging right.
I think anytime these days you can do something that creates community, that puts people with other people, whether that's physically better if you can do that, but virtually is better than nothing. That I think that's the only way the world gets to be a better place these days. Is you need to have common goals that aren't political in that sense, but that actually unite people towards something that is beneficial. Most people want to do something good. Right. So
Well,
give them the tools to do that.
I want to give a shout out to the state of California because I feel like they've been pretty supportive of the research that you guys are doing at some level with some funds, right? Is that accurate?
They have been supportive. I do know graduate students who have been funded this year to do work specifically on fire impacts on wildlife. So there is still funding coming in through the state, but obviously, like there are shortfalls everywhere. Though, the state's in a budgetary crisis. The UC system is in a budgetary crisis. So everyone is making do on very little right now. And I think it's honestly incredible if you look around and just think about the amount of knowledge that is still being garnered with shoestring budgets. I mean, Project Phoenix is funded, but it's not funded with much, and we're still doing a lot. And I think that speaks to just having, the right team of people with the right motivation to really just try to make the most of this challenging time.
Olivia, I wanted to ask, for Project Phoenix, do you want people throughout California or just throughout LA County, or what region are you seeking people from?
So our study area includes California, Oregon, and Washington, so all of the states that border the West Coast. But most of our volunteers are based in LA, which is actually really cool because it means that we've got great coverage across a very heterogeneous, resting urban area. But we've got pockets all over the West Coast. You have a number of volunteers in Seattle and the Bay Area as well, and then scattered in more rural areas throughout the states.
Yeah, any area, the broader the area, the more likely that it is to be hit by smoke because, as you're saying, like, we don't know where smoke will be and when. So that's one reason why we actually broadened it out from just California to include Oregon and Washington, to increase the likelihood of some of our sites experiencing smoke while people are doing surveys.
What happens to birds singing if their lungs are damaged a bit? I mean, is it changing that? I can imagine if that's something that is sexually selected on, you could drive changes in vocalizations just through the hoarseness that comes from being in a fire.
It's a great question. To my knowledge, no one has specifically tested how wildfire smoke impacts singing behavior in birds. However, there are a couple of studies that have looked at how smoke disturbance disrupts soundscapes, so summaries of the acoustic environment, and shown that biophony, or sounds produced by living organisms, declines when it's smoky. And one of my colleagues at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Dr. Wendy Erb, studies how wildfire smoke is impacting the health and behavior of orangutans. And she found that their calling is disrupted by smoke exposure for the reasons that you mentioned. they essentially sound like smokers when it is smoky, which makes sense because we know what that smoker voice is like, and orangutans are not immune from that. So I certainly think there's potential to think about how vocalizing behavior is impacted by smoke and what the evolutionary consequences of that might be.
Yeah.
What about visual systems in the smoke?
I was just going to go there. You read my mind. I was going to say, that is something I've been thinking a lot with feathers. Again, if, they're covered in black soot from smoke or otherwise, what does that do to their visual signals? And I suspect there are impacts, but no one's studying it. And, so there's like the long term of once things get dirty or once lungs get damaged, and then there's the immediate, what's the light environment like? We know it's not good during a smoke event. And so very, very little work has been done on this. So it's kind of a TBD. Hopefully we can get some funding.
You could do some of the funny things that people did to look at whether or not the signals in UV light are actually received by birds, like go put sunscreen on them.
Mm-hmm.
See if they're still recognized as their own species. But, you could make them darker.
Absolutely. Using museum, that's kind of originally with Melissa's project, we were planning to do both IR and visual signals to we have dirty specimens in our collection. We have clean specimens of the same species. We can measure them with a spectrophotometer and put that, use the avian visual model to model how birds are probably seeing these colors and ask how different they are. So that is something I would still like to do and still plan to do. Just need people to do it type of thing.
Olivia, we've always said this. There's no end to the number of projects that specimens will inspire.
Definitely not.
I wanted to ask just to clarify for myself, when you were talking about the studies you're doing with how dirty feathers are, you're talking about what's on the outside of the feathers. It's not like a drug test of hair where you're looking at. Okay.
Yeah. So we're literally looking at what's covering the surface of feathers, what's inside of the feathers, as they're growing. That's a whole nother question, and kind of starting a new collaboration on that with some colleagues in Montana and the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology who have been actually surveying birds in the Sierra Nevadas and areas that have been burned and not burned. And I think there's some interesting questions for that too. So again, there's no shortage of questions out there.
Yeah. Amanda, looking inside at things like immune responses could be really important, or inflammation markers. Those things have got to go through the roof. But then, how long can a bird be inflamed like that and not have it have fitness? Well, individual death consequences. But no offense to the individual, but that's not evolution. But what happens is if you stop putting genes into the next generation because you're like that, your body's too inflamed, you don't have enough reserves to actually reproduce or to feed young, that has obviously dramatic consequences for bird population numbers, their distributions, even wandering. Are birds going to develop a more of a wanderlust? Because if you're exposed to fires more frequently and it is episodic and unpredictable, are you better off if you can move? But some birds, they can't move, or they don't move very much, but this could change that.
And there are regimes in the world where birds are adapted to actually use areas that get burned in reasonable way, because it changes the landscape, brings in flushes of insects as new vegetation starts. And so I've been in places in Bolivia where we got 2 first records for the country after a fire went through the Campo Cerrado, the grasslands that we were working in, because these birds moved into the area and occurred in, maybe even for the first time in Brazil or in Bolivia when it happened.
Yeah. Everything is so complicated. There's the fire itself, there's the habitat changes resulting from the fire, and then there's the smoke, which is really what we're focusing on. And to your point, Shannon, I also, if birds are having to adapt to this inflammation and potentially, let's say they're evolving so that they become less inflamed by wildfire smoke,
Right.
what does that do to their ability to respond to diseases that cause inflammation? I did a lot of work on host parasite coevolution for my PhD, and I've thought a lot about, diseases and how evolution for one can make you more, susceptible to another one from both an evolutionary or just a physiological perspective. So I think there's a lot of like combinatorial things that are
turn them all
probably
into
gonna be
bats,
issues.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Where there will be the reservoirs and therefore distributors of pathogens that don't affect them, right? So that's one of the things that bats are thought to do is be reservoirs of these because their immune systems have been altered such that they don't die from them, but they can carry them and express them. And that's why we need to know way more about bats.
Yeah.
Because we don't even know what most of the species are, and we certainly don't know what they carry or don't carry and why. But, I mean, I can see all of those things potentially happening. I can see it driving changes in toll-like receptors, one of the things that Allison studied previously. So, yeah, there's just no end of things that you can do.
No. Olivia's dragged me into this smoke world, and I have a feeling I'll be here for quite a while.
You're welcome.
Or open
Smoke's
my
not
eyes to
going
it, I
any-
think we can say. Yeah.
There's so much unanswered. There's so much unanswered, and there's so many opportunities. And here we are just talking about birds and a little bit about bats. I don't really like bats, gotta be honest. I'm more of a bird girl. But we haven't even talked about other animals. And there's these same questions about the health and fitness consequences, the evolutionary consequences. That plays into other taxa too. I worked with a wonderful researcher named Jessalyn Ayers looking at how the rates at which camera traps pick up mammals changes when it's smoky, which suggests that there's something different about mammalian behavior due to smoke disturbance as well. So we're not just picking this up in birds. It's just that birds are inherently more sensitive than other taxa. But even within mammals, you think about the fact that we've got mammals that live on land, we've got mammals that live in water, and you might think, well, the mammals that live in water are surely safe from smoke, but that's not true because they come up to the air to breathe. And there's some studies showing that like wildfire smoke events that impacted San Diego had major health consequences for dolphins at a Navy center. So I think they came down with respiratory distress and some sort of illness like a pneumonia-like illness. So like could be a really big deal for animals.
So how old is your son, Olivia?
He's going to be 18 months next week. He's so cute. And I love hanging out with him. And he's really curious about the world around him. And he's going to be a birder like his mama. I can feel it. I just sent Allison a video yesterday. His name's Owen. My son's name is Owen. And Owen doesn't get to watch very much TV, but he gets to watch 5 minutes of a bird documentary in the morning so that I can grab my things and get us out the door for daycare. And he loves watching the birds of paradise do their like little back and forth dance. And so he'll stand in front of the TV and pretend to be a bird of paradise going back and forth. And it makes my day every single morning. So that's one of my favorite new traditions. He'll get bored of it by next week. But right now, he's really into it.
That is so cute.
He is so cute.
Well, thank you both for coming on. This has been really, really great to talk to both of you, and we're really excited for all of our listeners too to like learn more about this. And so it's really been a pleasure talking with you both.
Thanks for having us. And I hope that folks listening considered joining Project Phoenix, Project Feeder Watch, Nest Watch, Christmas Bird Count. There are so many opportunities to engage in participatory science, and researchers do use this data. It is of critical importance for monitoring bird populations and, more importantly, for figuring out how we can all help birds thrive in an increasingly uncertain and, quite frankly, dangerous world for them. And there are a lot of opportunities for us all to step up and help, and we are trying hard to figure out the best way to use limited conservation dollars to make that happen, and this data makes a huge impact. So I really hope folks consider signing up for Project Phoenix or Project Feeder Watch, and I'm available to answer any questions that folks have about either program anytime.
Yes, thanks so much for having us. It's really been a pleasure. I'll just echo everything Olivia said. times a million.
Oh.
I'm so sad I don't work with Allison every day in the office anymore. I miss you. This is so much fun.
I know, not as sad as I am. It's been
Oh.
hard to see Olivia leave. Well, it's happy and sad, you know.
Well,
That's
at
one
least
of the
we're getting ice
worst
cream on Monday.
things. That's one of the worst things. You know, when you're a student, you're used to being the one that leaves, right? You're the one who goes to exciting new opportunities. And now Allison is more sedentary. And then you watch all these great people who leave, and you don't want any of them to go. It's like, oh, how could you leave me? What's the matter with you? You need to stay around me for forever.
Seeing them go to the next exciting thing is actually the best feeling. You know, it's funny. It's like you get excited when you get positive things to yourself, but it turns out when you're a mentor to somebody and you see them get the job, get the grant, get the paper published, it's like tons more exciting. So it is just wonderful to see Olivia get this job, which I think she's going to be awesome at.
People used to tell me that I was going to fall apart when Pete left the house. Because we did so much together. And I'm like, no, the students have been leaving for a while now. And so I've been broken into the idea that younger people you love that much are going to leave you. Okay.
Don't say that. Owen's going to be in my house at 18 months old forever. Nothing's ever going to change. He's never going to grow up. He's never going to leave me.
They're interesting no matter what age they are. I mean, even well into adulthood, as I watch our son develop new things, even now.
It's just amazing, right? Like, it's just amazing to watch this little human grow and become his own deal. It's just awesome. He's very different than me in many ways, and it's just fun.
I used to view our son as a long-term behavioral experiment, watching him the way I would watch a bird. And it sounds, people think I'm crazy, but what it ended up being like. I used to watch him with like documentation of what he could do, and when, and
that's cool.
Anyways, so
amazing.
That makes them. They're always interesting.
I love that.
Always interesting. Always fun. So
I think that's cool because we know Pete turned out really, really well. So I'm okay with you keep treating him
I didn't damage him by thinking of him as a bird.
Careful now.
He wasn't overstudied.
Right.
Well, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for having us. And if you do have any questions about our research at any time, we are available.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sounds great.
Maybe I can come back and talk about bird feathers and colors with y'all another time.
We would love that.
Oh, that'd be
that
great.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks everyone for listening. We kept recording for a bit after the episode ended, and there was some really interesting stuff in there from Allison and Olivia on bird feathers. So here's a little bonus content for you, just something to tack on at the end here. Enjoy.
For a vacation this last week, and they sent me a picture of this very interesting peacock that had a bunch of white feathers, and I looked it up and I realized it was a piebald peacock, so it didn't have color in some of its feathers from leucism. But then I was really thrown by how to explain the lack of blue, because blue is structural, so it's not a lack of pigment. So what is leucism in birds that are blue? Like, what is that? How does that come?
What a great question, Olivia.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people think of structural color being produced by simply the structure of the feathers, and pigmentary color being produced purely from the pigment. But you actually have structure involved in both, and you have pigment involved in both. In structural colors, iridescent colors are a little bit different, but in all structural colors pretty much have melanin pigments that are responsible for absorbing all of the wavelengths of light that the structure of the feather is not refracting off. So essentially, if you're missing that melanin, then all the blue light's being refracted off, but all of the other light is as well, because there's nothing absorbing the excess light, basically. And so, that's an essential component of producing structural color. And actually, one of the things my new postdoc, Jenna McCullough, who I know has been on your show before, has studying for her postdoc is structural white color, and how is that made, and how does it involve changes in structure versus change in pigment. So
That's
Good
so
question,
cool.
Olivia.
I
So
love
yeah,
the
you
yeah,
see
inside
a
pictures too.
loose system.
Man.
Yeah.
You can't study those things without specimens. And in fact, you would never know about the fact that white isn't all white if you didn't have specimens to go and take a look at.
Exactly. I mean, even like pigment color, brown feathers or yellow feathers, they're embedded in some sort of matrix that's scattering some sort of light. So it's you can never truly separate those things.
And
That's why I've changed a lot about how I think about how color is made from having these discrete bins to having it actually be kind of a hierarchy of different options of things you can change in the feathers, and all feathers have this hierarchy, and it's just how you're tuning each piece of it.
Yeah, it's not good enough to look even in excellent picture books or really good artwork that's in, that's in field guides that you might see, because even with white is not white is not white. So you can go and count the number of white birds, and Allison's going to tell you didn't count the number of white birds.
It's true. Yeah. What is white? White is much more complicated than you think. And we just had a paper come out led by Rosalind Price Waldman, looking at how actually the way feathers layer on top of each other is really important for color production as well. And that we wouldn't have learned if we weren't looking at feathers on specimens, and had just been looking at, a single feather, or like looking at the colors as painted in books. But turns out the birds layer their colors just like artists gesso their canvases to make their colors much more vibrant or brighter. So again, we should have a whole conversation about bird colors.
Very
Sure.
cool.
Do you remember
Very cool.
when Savannah Regala came, John? She
Yep.
she proposed. She got money to come from the Film Museum, so she gave us a proposal, and I said, "No way is she sticking a probe and measuring heat in a specimen underneath differently colored feathers. There's no way that works." But we were so intrigued because it was so novel that she came, and every time I look at this picture we have of her setup, I think of how absolutely mind-blowing it was when she started collecting data and showing us what she was finding. It was just so much fun. That's why museums are so much fun. There's so many cool people who are doing things you never even thought of.
They are. And I don't know if you've heard this, Shannon, but we just got an NSF grant to get new cabinets for our collection.
Oh,
so we're
good.
just about to pack everything up, and I'm really, really excited to just look at all the birds. It's something I don't get to do enough, is look at the birds in my collection. There's cabinets I've never opened before. So I'm excited to look at them all and just see what discoveries we make simply by looking.
That very thing is what made me an ornithologist. I got a job working in the museum in British Columbia, and it was at the very beginning of computerization. And our job was to put this special material underneath all the specimens in the cases. And so we touched every bird in the collection over the course of that summer. And I was so taken by some bizarre things, which is that I could line up all the birds' beaks and they would be perfectly in line as long as nobody touched the cabinets. And all of their tags were all perfectly laid out. And so I became fascinated by museum tags, by the fact that there was a career where obsessive compulsive tidiness and order was a benefit, not just something that needed medication. And I still feel like that when we go into the collections. People leave little notes inside the collections that are very charming, of things that they find, but they don't think they can study themselves. So they leave the breadcrumb for the next generation to come after them, which I also find charming. And we're about to teach Birds of the World again, where it's basically a family thing in the collection. The students have to know what a family of birds is, what their characteristics are, how many species there are, and they have to be able to identify a bird to the family. And I remember the first time we did this, John wasn't here, and one of the people who worked for him helped me pull all the specimens. And when I was going through the cabinets trying to figure out what I was going to pull, I realized just how basically impossibly you can make that test. I could pull 100 blackbirds. That would be the cruelest thing ever to do to someone, is just pick 100 blackbirds out and ask them to tell me what family this is in. horribly
Or
cruel.
just pull the tanagers. If you could just pull tanagers, and people would be very
Well, we just called something a scarlet tanager, and alas, not an effective name anymore.
No.
But yeah, so anything that puts you into looking at things, it's like, wow, does that really exist? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's the best.
So don't be a stranger, Olivia, when you go to...
I'll stay in touch. I'll ask if I have questions. I still want to circle back to the idea I brought up at the round table of a central place where members of the public can go when they find dead birds and who wants them from salvage. I should share, actually. This year in Feeder Watch, we are expanding our efforts to better understand bird strikes. And so feeder watchers will be helping us to collect additional data on bird collisions at their residences, as well as information about their windows, what they look like, how big they are, any window strike mitigation strategies that they're currently using. And we're going to put that data together to better assess the efficacy of these various mitigation strategies. And one question I am sure that we are going to get from feeder watchers is, unfortunately, I have now found a dead bird. What do I do with it? And there are some, standard replies, but I think if there are local museums in their area who would like that bird from first salvage, I would love to be able to point them in the right direction, but I can't possibly know who that is for our participants in the US and Canada. So building some sort of central database where folks can say, I'm open to this, that would be so helpful.
It's that is a very difficult question, actually.
I'm sure.
So RJ and Amanda, just so you know, we were at the American Ornithological Society meetings in St. Louis 2 weeks ago. And one of the things we did was had a workshop on open to anybody at the meeting to come talk about salvaging specimens. And we actually had 100 people come, which was really good because it wasn't just the collections community, but a broader spectrum, which is really good.
That's great.
I mean, that's a huge... Well, you have to convince administrators that that's an okay thing to do in a museum, because we've gotten so much grief over what they call undirected collecting. And I'm like, if there's anybody who should be able to do undirected collecting, a word I reject, it's us. Like, I don't understand the point. Isn't the point to augment the collections? Isn't that the point that birds don't die in vain, that we can preserve them for science? Isn't that the point of our existence? Because if people hadn't been doing that for 150 years, we wouldn't have the specimens we use today, right? So I reject that idea, but that doesn't mean it's not costly, given the amount of cases and the amount of staff. I mean, it's really staff that and so a lot of museums they won't take these birds, and they won't take her from things we have to get over, which is, I'm not going to take a house sparrow or a starling. Are you kidding me? But actually, those things are declining in their native range, and we don't know very much about them here, except we do know that they've changed and they're pretty interesting. And, so you can see people raising their eyebrows, even the Cornell people, to try to get them to consider introduced species and not have that kind of snobbiness associated with them. We have our student Louise, who studies European goldfinches. First off, nobody, until you start putting those things in eBird, people around here didn't know there was such a thing as a European goldfinch with a population in Illinois. That is seemingly expanding, although not to my backyard, unfortunately. But, there's lots of things we can learn from these unnatural experiments of introductions. And I don't know, there's got to be some place to put these things. And if it's not in our museums, then what the heck are we doing? But, but we don't have enough people to prepare the specimens. And these days it's really tricky to even know what to tell people because of bird flu.
Yeah,
So
Allison and I
yes.
talked a lot about that.
It's a very, mainly John and I will go pick the bird up for people. I don't want to tell people to pick up a bird right now, although they still do, but, but now we tell them to suit up like it's the deaths of COVID before you go out and pick up a bird even. But, there's so much things we never would have known. And when you think about what that did around here, it's changing building design. Those things are really critically important. You have to do that with data. Builders aren't going to, they're not going to build differently if you don't force them to.
True. Although I think that the story of McCormick Place in Chicago is pretty damn compelling.
Yeah.
Oh, you would think, but you would be wrong.
No,
What's compelling to me and many members of the public.
It's absolutely made a huge difference.
It has, but there's still pushback on the Chicago City Council for implementing bird-friendly business building design. It's getting further and further and further along, but it's a tough slog. You need people dedicated to these things, and that's tricky. And it all takes communities, right? I can't go dictate to people at McCormick Place what to do with their window treatments. But if we work together with building people as a team, we can change building practices. And, in the museum, if we didn't work together as a team with security, we wouldn't know when the freezer went out, for example. They wouldn't be so tuned to telling us, oh, the alarm is going off, you better do something. You better put those parts of the museum on the security watch so that people are going by them regularly to tell us when there's an issue, right? So it takes a lot of different kinds of people, and that takes process. You have to have regular process, routine parts of your process. And now we know a whole lot about North American birds, like they're getting smaller, significantly smaller over the course of my lifetime, which is, most people would have said 40 years ago that that's not even possible. But it's not only possible, it's actually happening, and it's happening across North American birds, even birds that are not related to each other. So, just like your Project Phoenix with the smoke, that could be something too that's generalizable across every taxon of birds that is coming into that smoke comes into contact with. And is there anything general about the response? So it's so
Stay
fascinating
tuned. Got lots left to learn. I do have to run, mostly because I have been on Zoom now with all of my amazing teams on the East Coast for about 7 hours, and I really need to go eat something. But this has been so lovely. Yeah. You are all wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. I will be in touch, I'm sure, with questions about birds for you to answer for our many participants, and what to do with dead birds and who to contact in this region about what. So I'm so glad that I have these connections. And if anybody has any questions about Feeder Watcher or Phoenix, just let us know.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
It was lovely to meet you all.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Have a great evening.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Olivia.